address you. I didn't mention in my first talk on the first day, I am an academic, I'm a professor, and rather than talking and sharing from my experience, this one's a bit more theory. The concept here is innovation versus imitation, leading in an industry dominated by followers. I'm going to give a brief look at history and Christians' role in relationship to the arts. Throughout history, Christians have been a principal force, leading the way in the arts and humanities. However, in the 20th century, Christians took a back seat, where they largely remain to the present day. In this talk, I will briefly explore the background of how we arrived at this place, and then offer a few suggestions on lighting a path that leads out of the current status quo. I will end with the charge to Christian innovators to take the lead in creating art and media that is more than mere imitation of what is being put into the market by our secular counterparts. First, how we got here. In her book, Total Truth, Liberating Christianity from Its Cultural Captivity, one of America's premier female evangelical voices, Nancy Pearcey, discusses the impact of the secular revolution that occurred in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. She observed the following phenomenon, quote, there was a drive to professionalize all fields, which meant, in practice, throwing off Christian worldview and cultivating a secular approach that was touted as scientific and value-free. Pearcey goes on to note that this secular revolution affected every part of American culture, including media and the arts. This reflects a departure from centuries past, where Christianity played a central role in the arts, as evidenced by the illuminated manuscripts of the 7th and 8th centuries, as evidenced by the Book of Kells in Ireland, to the Byzantine-style art that became prevalent after the fall of Constantinople through the late medieval period from the 1200s to 1400s, leading up to the Italian Renaissance from the 1400s to the 1600s, that brought us the masters such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. Pearcey notes that the Enlightenment era, which placed Christianity on the defensive, did the very same thing to the arts and humanities. Quote, Enlightenment thinkers began to deny that art had anything to do with truth. As artistic expressions became increasingly reflective of Enlightenment ideals, many Christians responded by retreating into matters of faith and spirituality, abandoning the arts and media to the secularists. The 17th century saw the rise of the Lutheran Pietist movement in Germany, which stood in opposition to the corrupting influences and worldliness expressed in the arts and humanities. The effect of this would see Christians relegated even more firmly into their own private religious sector, further cementing the divide between Christians and the arts. This pietism spread from Germany to the rest of Europe before immigrating to North America through the Puritans. Such puritanical convictions informed 20th century evangelical fundamentalism and ultimately gained a foothold in interdenominational evangelical Christianity, where it resides to the present day, where we are today. In the middle of the last century, H. Richard Niebuhr released his classic work, Christ and Culture, which addressed the question of how Christians should engage the world. Niebuhr proposed 5 different approaches, which he labeled 1, Christ against culture, 2, Christ of culture, 3, Christ above culture, 4, Christ and culture in paradox, and 5, Christ, the transformer of culture. To this day, Niebuhr's framework has remained impactful on how Christians approach the question of how Christianity should interface with culture. However, it should be noted that Niebuhr was writing as a liberal Protestant in mid-20th century America, and his framework reflected this. Several of his categories are quite problematic, and though there are, without a doubt, Christians who have taken each of these approaches, many Christians have found it necessary to reevaluate Niebuhr's paradigm. Francis A. Schaeffer, who you're probably familiar with, in his classic work, How Should We Then Live, offers a Christian worldview analysis of the decline in Western culture and appeals to the Christian's role in turning the tide. In Schaeffer's work, which to a tremendous degree has been continued by Nancy Pearcey, he identifies a two-story faith-culture divide, which he suggests has been equally adopted by the modern world as well as by most Christians. Schaeffer and Pearcey maintain that Enlightenment ideals introduced a two-tiered, dichotomous view of the world where issues of faith and values exist in an upper story tier that is hermetically sealed from the lower story, where most real-world issues are considered. Subsequently, Christians have largely bought into this contrived two-story paradigm, resulting in some choosing to live like Christians on Sunday mornings and like secularists for the rest of the week. Integration of the upper story where faith, values, and spirituality reside, with the lower story where facts, reason, and practicality reside, has proven to be as challenging for Christians as it is for many unbelievers. Schaeffer and Pearcey have drawn attention to this by imploring Christians to reconcile the two stories by embracing the Christian worldview. Their affinity for the humanities and arts was rivaled by their commitment to a biblical understanding of the world and the Christian's place of respect to both. Pearcey has called out American evangelicals that she has referred to as boxed-in believers, claiming that they have accepted the false notion that religion is a private emotional experience that is relegated to that upper story of life, while the rest of the human experience is realized in the lower story, where intellectual life, including political, social, economic, and cultural phenomena, occur. As a result of this false dichotomy, Christians find themselves today with a voice that can be heard only by those who would step inside a church building. Moreover, it is one which is qualified to speak only to matters of religion and spirituality. If that weren't enough, these issues are often considered so subjective and unrelated to objective reality that they're of little relevance to any but one who would choose to assign them a degree of personal significance. To the same extent to which the Christian voice and influence has been marginalized in the political, social, and cultural spheres, its absence is no less realized in the arts and humanities. Where previously the world's master artists were adorning cathedrals with depictions taken straight from the pages of the Old and New Testaments, today's secularists are placing crucifixes in jars of urine and calling it art. Poetic verse has been exchanged for profane tirades in literature and music, while order and sensibility has eroded to meaningless chaos to reflect a nihilistic worldview where nothing makes sense. In a predictable turn of events, as if scripted by a demonic hand, we've witnessed the abandonment of expressing Judeo-Christian virtues in storytelling. Where once stories were carefully crafted to communicate morals through the exploits of valorous heroes making daring sacrifices to stave off malevolent threats, the narrative arc turned to paint an amoral world using a palette with nothing but shades of gray. A virtueless world became championed as a better and more true-to-life depiction of the real world in which we live, where more interesting stories could be told, without the confines of passé tropes where good and evil were in conflict. The hero was exchanged for the anti-hero, and the revenge fantasy emerged as the only motivation sufficient to drive him into action. However, the proposition of a valueless media was not long-lived. And within a short window, movies, television, and games became vehicles for thrusting a new set of values onto the consumer. So that now, with the revolution complete, modern media subscribes to a new set of value standards that includes depicting deviant lifestyles and fringe behavior as normative. Biblical values are no longer ignored, but are now cast as the threat that must be overthrown. Any ensemble of characters is not unless LGBTQIA+ lifestyles are represented and must be depicted in the most positive light at threat of falling into the crosshairs of cancel culture. The same cultural trends are evidenced in the game industry, from Blizzard Entertainment's Overwatch 2016, which was discussed earlier. It boasted a socially progressive storyline featuring not one, but two homosexual characters. To Fantasy Flight's 2021 reskin of the Battlestar Galactica board game, which despite being set against the backdrop of H.P. Lovecraft's world, it boasts what could be the most progressively woke cast of characters featured at the tabletop game, including transvestites and gender-confused characters. There are countless other examples that can be pointed to that highlight the value-laden projects that are being churned out by secular game studios. The voices calling for value neutrality have receded, and the only representation that is no longer welcome is one that is distinctly Christian. How to move forward. Today, Christians find themselves fighting for a place at the table. From Hollywood to the record studios, to mainline publishing as well as game production, there is no uncertainty that there is a strong anti-Christian bias in the arts industry. But before we cry foul, it is important to consider whether this bias might actually be justifiable. One must acknowledge that modern Christian media is so often a poor imitation of its secular counterpart. The key difference being simply that content deemed objectionable to most Christians is swapped out for gospel-heavy material. Ironically, the substitution becomes the very thing that secular audiences find objectionable, besides the poor quality of the presentation. This bears out across all media platforms. For instance, throughout the history of film, faith-based projects have almost always been poor substitutes for mainstream movies put out by secular studios. Christian films are known for being ill-conceived, low-budget, and shoddily executed. The same can be said for Christian music. With few exceptions, Christian music has aspired to be nothing more than an imitation of the secular alternatives, sans the explicit content, and with the veneer of positivity or Christian jargon added. This brings us to consider Christian games. Sadly, faith-based games are often no less guilty of the same sins as these other forms of Christian media. From video games to tabletop, games made by Christian creators are sometimes subtle, and other times deliberate rip-offs of popular titles, minus the sleek gameplay, the careful attention to detail, and the overall craftsmanship that is required to compete in an oversaturated secular marketplace. Christians, and Christian parents in particular, are typically eager to accept any substitution for media that is deemed objectionable by Christians' standards. This leaves next to no choices available for kids raised in Christian homes to experience modern media besides the poor substitutions that parents determine are acceptable for the home. This opens the door for Christian creators to put out a shoddy imitation of the same material that has been stripped of offensive material and plastered with some Bible verses or Christian jargon that would signal to the Christian consumer that this product won't cause harm to your children. Christians have come to accept these standards because they prioritize the values over the craftsmanship. However, non-Christians who do not share an appreciation for these values do not judge the media by this standard, and therefore, like other faith-based media, Christian games are found suitable only by Christian audiences. The possibility for crossover or outreach becomes nearly impossible. Nevertheless, Christians will often placard the game with a heavy-handed and overt evangelistic message aimed at targeting an audience that will never deign to crack the box of the game. Albeit in some cases, the target audience is limited to the child of the Christian parent who brought the Christian media into the home. But even in such cases, the kids who are experiencing these poor imitations of secular media find themselves longing to access the superior alternatives that their non-Christian friends are experiencing. This is not a good Christian witness. Neither does this meet the standard expressed in the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Or in the New Testament, Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord and not for man. Christians created in the image of a creative God should be the ones leading the way in the arts and the humanities. If Christians have come to grips with the depravity of the human condition and have experienced the height of forgiveness through the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus Christ, then we should find ourselves uniquely suited to communicate the greatest stories of tragedy and triumph. Moreover, if Christians recognize that the Creator God of the universe has created mankind to uniquely express His image, then we should find ourselves magnificently suited to wield that creativity in one hand while firmly wielding the faith in the other. As we've seen throughout history, Christians have a unique potential to lead in the arts and humanities, to be innovators rather than imitators. If we stop short of this calling, we are relinquishing our role of being influencers in this culture to non-Christians, and we are ourselves resigning to be mere followers. In conclusion, down through history, Christians have been a principal force leading the way in the arts and humanities. However, today we find ourselves in the back seat, unhappy with the direction that those who are sitting behind the wheel are taking us. Christians who find themselves calling out from the sidelines of today's culture would do well to remember that this is not the purpose for which we were created. We have been, quote, set free from this present evil age, Galatians 1:4. And yet God has chosen not to take us out from the world, but that we should remain in it, though not be of it. He has placed us here as light shining through the darkness, to magnify Christ to a world that desperately needs Him. May we not be content being imitators who merely follow the lead of our secular counterparts. We have been called to be innovators, leaders, and creators who have been uniquely equipped by our Creator God to shine the glorious light of the gospel into the world in which we live. And we live up to this high call. Finally, I pray that if your hand finds itself to do game design, that you would do it with all your might, as unto the Lord, and not for men. Thank you. You're welcome to share these books with anybody who would like to take a look. I'll have them over at my table. This one's Total Truth by Nancy Pearcey. It's called Liberating Christianity from Its Cultural Captivity, also by Nancy Pearcey. Saving Leonardo, as in Leonardo da Vinci, a call to resist the secular assault on mind, morals, and meaning. Okay? I'd be happy to talk to you about it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.